Coming up on District Wire News, Decision 2016. We are just one day away from Election Day, and the race is neck and neck. What's the electoral map look like today? And is early voting swinging the election one direction? We'll break it down.
And the Latino vote. Will it make a difference for either candidate? Are Latinos turning out to the vote in big swing states? And are African Americans coming to the polls in big numbers? We'll hear from the experts straight ahead. A special edition of District Wire News, Decision 2016 starts now.
Good afternoon, I'm Maggie Miller.
And I'm Chelsea Smart. Former United States Attorney General Janet Reno has died. Reno was the first female Attorney General to serve for 8 years during President Bill Clinton's administration. She is known for her role in political scandals such as Whitewater, Filegate, and the Lewinsky affair. She is remembered for her blunt words and determined spirit. She died from complications of Parkinson's disease. She was 78.
Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump is campaigning in Michigan, Minnesota, Pennsylvania, Nevada, North Carolina, Florida, and New Hampshire as the election closes. Trump is saying that he is on a more rigorous schedule than Clinton. Trump's running mate, Indiana Governor Mike Pence, has also been on the campaign trail. Pence spoke in rallies in Florida and North Carolina today. Former Senator Rick Santorum will speak for Trump today also in Iowa.
Hillary Clinton is focusing on 3 battleground states today. She will speak in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and North Carolina. President Obama, First Lady Michelle Obama, and Bill and Chelsea Clinton will also make appearances today. Al Gore, Ann Holton, Vice President Joe Biden, and Tim Kaine will also be traveling across the country in the final days before the vote.
As the presidential campaign is coming to an end, Americans have been keeping their eyes on pre-election polls. What strategies are the candidates using to boost their numbers? And just how much can we rely on the polls to predict the winner? With the latest update on where the polls stand, we go live to Megan Yoder in studio.
Thanks, Maggie. We are getting down to the wire. Tomorrow is Election Day, and what could really make it or break it for the 2 candidates are those big battleground states like Pennsylvania, Virginia, and North Carolina, all states with a high number of electoral votes. But ultimately, it's going to come down to who gets out to vote tomorrow.
Secretary Clinton obviously had a major lead, a very solid lead, and an even stronger battleground state lead a week ago Friday until the FBI announcement that wasn't one, that, we found somebody's laptop that might be related, so let's do this announcement. And that sent the polls into a frenzy, but it's hard to know how much of an impact it really had. Things changed the last polls end. Have you sampled the right people? A lot of people don't have landlines anymore. A lot of questions about we could be in a realignment of parties right now, so trying to have a sample that's roughly representative of the electorate is hard.
Hillary Clinton's corruption is on a scale we have never seen before.
The candidates spent the weekend campaigning hard in key states, but now it's all about who shows up to vote.
I think at this point, first of all, so many people have already voted. And at this point, even campaigns don't operate in what they call a persuasion phase now, right? They're not trying to change people's minds. At this point, it's all about getting your voters to the polls.
I will be on your side. I will fight for you, fight for your families, fight for your futures.
For District.
And the latest polls have Clinton leading at 45%, Trump just behind her at 42%, third-party candidates Gary Johnson and Jill Stein at 8% and 4% respectively. So Clinton has the lead for now, but as I mentioned before, it's all going to come down to tomorrow and what the voters decide. Back to you.
Polls have played a major role in following the elections, and voters are wondering if they are going to accurately predict the election results. With more minority groups voting than ever before, will the polls portray the demographics that are showing up for this vote? Joining us now to talk more about this is Stephen Taylor, Associate Professor in the Department of Government at American University. Thank you for joining us, Professor.
Thank you for having me.
What would you say are some ways that polling organizations segment the population when polling? And how would you say they make sure the results comprise an accurate representation of voters?
Well, one thing to make sure that they comprise an accurate representation is to make sure that the sample size is large enough. And that's the first thing they have to look at, which is pretty easy to do. And then they, it depends on what polling. Some polling is done by telephone polling, and of course elections are often called on the basis of exit polling, where persons at various polling places talking to those subsequent to their casting their ballots to find out what the trends show on the basis of those who've been polled.
Interesting. So some project that the divisiveness of the 2016 election will have some of these voters staying home, whereas in 2008 and 2012 there were record numbers of minority Americans who voted. Now we're not so sure. So we have a poll showing this in early voting in Florida that comes from the Florida Division of Elections. Do you believe with the unexpected nature of the voting population, how do pollsters predict the trends are going to change in this election when it comes to voting demographics?
Well, a lot of the polls are of likely voters, so they talk to the person they polled and ask them how likely are they to come to the polls. And that can be deceptive at times, because sometimes people are reluctant to say that they're not going to vote, but that's one of the things they based on, because they talk to the different respondents, and the question is not just who are you voting for. They ask about their assessments of the candidates, those types of things, and that information might be more accurate. But when it comes to how likely are you to vote, there are a lot of factors that can impact that. Factors such as weather, factors such as transportation, accessibility, because a lot more people are intending, there are a lot of people who are intending to vote that might change their mind, or might have, might for different reasons have different reasons not to vote. Like in Florida is one thing, because they did have early voting, but say for instance in Virginia, where they don't have early voting, and that makes it a little bit more difficult to determine who's likely to come, because they don't have as much of a window of opportunity to come to the polls.
Do you foresee that being an issue in Virginia?
Possibly. Again, it depends on things like the weather, but the problem is when you don't have early voting, the lines are very long, and people are less likely to. Some people are less likely to come if they have to invest a lot of time and effort to go to the polls. But a lot of it has to do with whom they perceive as winning. Sometimes if they perceive their candidate as having less of a chance, then they're not going to come to the polls. But Virginia, with the race, the polling right now shows that Clinton is ahead, but not very far ahead. So therefore, the fact that it's not that there's no landslide predicted might mean that some people will be more likely to stay in line and wait until it's their turn to pull that lever or to punch that card.
So a lot of things can have an impact on polling. How would you say, how reliable are many political polls as a result?
I think if you're looking at past elections as an indicator, they're fairly reliable. People say that they called it wrong in 2000, where they initially called Florida for Gore, and then it turned out that he didn't win. But a lot of that might be because of the persons that they polled at the exit polls talked to people who thought that they had voted for Gore and might not have. They might not have voted for anybody, or they might have voted for the wrong candidate based on the information that was given to them prior to the election. So if you're looking at intent of the voters, I'm not so sure that was inaccurate. And in this day and age, polls tend to be a lot more accurate than they were in the past.
Interesting. What effect do you believe that third-party candidates tend to have on polling results, and do you think they should even be included in polls?
Well, they should be included in polls, because they certainly had an effect. In 1992, the Bush campaign is insistent that they would have won had there not been a third-party candidate. And some people in the Gore camp felt the same way. in 2000. So certainly they should be included because they can make the difference between who's going to win and lose depending on how strong that third-party candidacy is. In other cases, I don't think they had as much of an effect. You had a sizable third-party movement in 1980 with John Anderson, and he had enough votes to qualify for matching funds later on. But I don't think that affected the outcome because it wasn't as close of a race.
Do you see that being an issue with this race, with third-party candidates?
Well, the polls don't indicate such because the candidates have lost support over the months since the convention, so they're not polling high enough to affect a change. Like when you look at 92, I mean, close to 20%, or some 18% of the voters cast their ballot for Perot. I don't know how often you're going to have that type of a situation, and certainly not this time.
So another thing that we've seen in polling data is that a lot of voters don't really trust the candidates, I would say. In fact, according to the McClatchy Washington Bureau, over 50% of voters think that Hillary Clinton specifically has done something illegal, while around 26% of voters think Donald Trump has. What can both Clinton and Trump do in the next 24 hours, if they still can, to sway undecided voters? Do you think this would show up in polling efforts?
Well, certainly, there's more you can do with undecided voters than anybody else because they wait very late to make their decision. And I think what Clinton can do is make sure that her surrogates remind people of the very latest report from the FBI that once again exonerates her. And I think, and the polls haven't reflected that latest report because that report just came a day ago.
Very interesting. Well, thank you so much for being with us today, Professor. That was Stephen Taylor, an associate professor in the Department of Government at American University. Coming up, it's no secret that the Congress and the President have had a contentious relationship in the past 8 years. What do the next 4 years hold for either a President Clinton or a President Trump? And an in-depth discussion straight ahead.